Hi guys, this is Horror Studio 1 here. I'm not sure if you guys in the United States will remember this, but a couple years ago, actually like 13 years ago in 2003, there was a huge blackout in Toronto and a part of the USA as well. Apparently there was a factory somewhere that I guess the power leaked or something, causing the entire blackout of the city for 3 days straight. During that time I was about 11 years old at the time. And I just remember this experience so bad because living in, I guess, a first world country, I guess it's first world, right, in Canada, there's not a lot of tragedy or major droughts or anything like that happen here. I mean, if you go to like Japan or something, there's earthquakes all the time. Of course, if you're in a third world country, there's poverty and even worse stuff going on, wars and all that. But as someone that was born in Hong Kong and I grew up in Canada, I know I've never experienced anything like that kind of like a crisis for an entire city or an entire country. I mean, it wasn't horrible, granted, but I remember having to basically have a bucket of water, pouring bottles of water into buckets and using that to shower in the darkness with my parents holding a flashlight so I won't trip and fall and die. I remember those days as something imprinted in my memory, and it caused me a fear of blackouts, actually, and even like a certain sentiment towards it. It's like it's always a memory that'll be in my mind. Those guys that say, oh, when they were a kid there was World War II. Well, this is World War II for me, and I've always wanted to make a video that was about blackouts, but I'm really happy that I'm finally able to make one about these blackouts. I remember during those days there was one time where I was, looking out the window, this window actually right here, and there was a guy across the street, in a parking lot, just a random guy just standing there, and I remember that experience so well, and that image kept popping into my mind while I was making this Blackout horror stories video, because this is kind of essentially what that's talking about, and there's even a story in here that is the same story that I'm talking about, the same blackout in 2003 that happened in Toronto and parts of the USA. So, yeah, I guess I just always wanted to make a video, and finally I get a chance to make my blackout video. So anyways, grab a blanket, turn up. No, I was kidding, I turned it off. Wait. Turn off your lights, and I did. For 3 true scary horror stories that happened while it was blackout. The night of the blackout. This took place on the night of Thursday, August 14, 2003, the night of the epic power blackout in the northeastern US and Canada. At the time, I was living in Toronto. I was home working when the power suddenly went off. Seeing the traffic lights out and the chaos in the streets, I figured I had some time to kill and decided to go for a bike ride. At the time, I had no idea the power would be out for days on end, so I just rode and rode, thinking I would turn for home when I saw that the power had come back on. So even as the sunset crept in, there was still no power, so I just kept on riding and riding. I wound out quite a long way from my house, and I came to this big park in the west end of Toronto. I was familiar with the roads that ran through it, but on this particular night, with all the lights out, I lost my way. I ended up taking a wrong turn that brought me down a really steep hill. At the bottom, there were a few parking spots, but the only exit was a trail that ran along a line of trees, extending off into the silent distance. I turned around, intent on going back up, but seeing the massive hill awaiting me, I opted to check out the trail instead. The tree line extended along a wide clearing, and in the distance I could see a city street. I decided to head towards the street and start making my way back home finally. As soon as I started following the tree line, I noticed a solitary figure lurking up ahead, on the trail a few steps away from the trees. The second I saw him, warning bells went off. I thought about all the times I'd heard that empty parks in big cities at night could be very dangerous places. But I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, that it was probably just someone out walking their dog or something, and what were the chances that anything was even going to happen, like 1 in a million? I really didn't feel like turning around and biking back up that massive hill, so I just kept going. Still, inside me, I had a bad gut feeling, so I worked up to a good rate of speed as I approached the figure just in case. It's a good thing I did. As I neared him, I pulled wide off the trail to go around him. He started shuffling in my direction, trying to cut me off. Instinct took over. I pulled even wider and started pedaling like crazy. He sprang at me as I passed him, muttering some angry sounding but unintelligible curse at me as he dove and tried to knock me off of my bike. Fortunately, I had cut out wide enough and was going fast enough that he missed. I motored like a madman towards the street, not daring to look back. I reached the street, and it wasn't until I was back home, safe, and with my heart rate back to normal, that I realized how dangerous the situation I had just escaped, unscathed. If he'd managed to reach me, I would have been at the mercy of a faceless stranger who wanted to hurt me in a deserted park in the middle of a blackout. Blackout. Around 2 nights ago, we had a sudden blackout around 3 in the morning. Nothing huge, but since we had no electricity and my fan was not working, I had some issues going to sleep. I'm weird like that. I decided that since I could not go to sleep, I would read for a little bit, using a booklight I had gotten until the power came back on, and I could eventually fall back asleep. I was only a few pages in when I started to hear some talking that was coming up the street. At first I thought it was just a few kids walking around because the power was out on the street and they were spending the night at one of their houses and had nothing to do without power. I assumed I was right until I heard the first kid walking in front of the 2 other chanting something. The closer he got, the more I could make out. I'm not a Bible expert, but it sounded like he was quoting verses from the book of Revelations, along with some blessings asking God to praise the street. This is when it started to get really weird. The Bible verses I could probably take as a joke, but it was weird for this single kid to be walking around saying them while being trailed by 2 others. Not to mention, he sounded exasperated. The closest way I could define how he sounded was close to an orgasm. I know it sounds odd, but he was constantly short of breath and breathing hard. I, being curious, decided to look out my window just to see what the kid was doing. As he made his way down the street, with 2 people following behind him, assuming they were friends or at least knew each other, they randomly stopped next to my truck that was parked on the street. I doubted they could even see me. As they stood there, they were looking at my house, looking at the window I was standing in. The lead kid continued some of his verses before turning away and making 2 passes up and down my street, still saying verses before he turned onto another street and disappeared. I was planning on telling them to leave when they were walking up and down the street, but the way the lead kid was quoting these verses actually creeped me out. P.S. We have a mental hospital down the road and across a major street that houses teenagers who are mentally unstable. They get out quite frequently. The noises from the bedroom back door. This happened to me when I was around 7 years old. When I was younger, I used to live in the Dominican Republic with my grandparents on my father's side and his brother. My dad lived in the United States at the time. My uncle and I shared a bedroom. To clarify, I was a 7-year-old girl and my uncle was 9. And to get to it, you had to go through my grandma and grandpa's room. My room also had another door which led to the backyard. As a lot of you might know, the Dominican Republic can be really dangerous, specifically at night when the lights go out. Because the country can't afford to always keep the electricity running, we have blackouts multiple times a day, every day, and mostly during the nighttime when people are asleep. So nights are very, very dark. The door in my bedroom that opened to the backyard always scared me because I could hear everything from outside and it felt like someone could burst through the door and abduct me. The door was made of long planks of wood laid vertically next to each other. It was the type of wood that always looked like it's rotting. I think it was actually rotting. I faced my bed towards the door so that I could easily see if anyone tries to come through. Every night I would fall asleep from the boredom of staring at that door. My grandpa sympathized with me, and eventually he put a huge vintage wooden dresser in front of the door, and he bought off the back of some guy's truck. The dresser was so thick and heavy that I instantly felt safer. It started the very first night. As a habit of looking in that direction as I fall asleep, I was staring at the dresser. It was weird to look in that direction now because it was pitch black. I could no longer see the little beams of moonlight between the cracks on the doors, or hear the sounds of wild animals in the yard, or the late night traffic on the street. I remember it was nearing the season for tropical hurricanes, so some night I could hear faint sounds of the trees swishing and the door creaking. Some nights the door was louder, like it's finally breaking down from the pressure of the winds. My grandparents didn't see anything wrong with the door in the morning when I told them I was scared it might be falling apart. We never thought anything of it after that. A few weeks later, we had a huge storm. While I was trying to sleep, I could hear banging and crackling and creaking, and really loud whoosh and splash and thumps. Naturally, I thought it was just the storm, so did my uncle. Every night after the storm, we kept hearing similar sounds late at night. It would wake us up. We knew it wasn't the storm anymore, but we would try to be logical and realistic. It was probably the old dresser. It was probably the door because it got loose off its hinges. It was probably a stray cat scratching its paws on our door because the wood is soft. Cats have weird habits, right? It was my uncle trying to scare me, right? It was me trying to scare my uncle. We kept coming up with new excuses every night and blaming each other every single night. All that was kept inside the dresser were blankets, towels, curtains, and various linen for storage, so we never had a reason to look ourselves. The dresser was tall, and it had a divider in the middle. The left half had shelves where my grandma would fold the towels, and the right half had a hanging rack where she would hang curtains and sheets. Sometimes, my grandma would complain that the blankets had dirt on them. She would blame my uncle and myself, thinking we were wiping our hands on everything because we were too lazy to just wash them. One night, there was a louder than usual thump coming from the direction of the dresser. I woke up in a sudden panic, but my uncle was already wide awake. I immediately thought he was playing games and started yelling at him. My grandpa woke up and came to see what's going on. I told him my uncle woke me up because he was trying to scare me, but my uncle denied it and said he was woken up by all those noise outside. My grandpa didn't hear anything and just told us to stop playing around and go back to sleep. As he started to walk back into his room, we heard another loud thump. My grandpa had heard it too. We all got freaked out because that time, it sounded like it was coming from inside the dresser. He went to the bathroom and got the oil lamp we kept in there. He turned it on and opened the dresser to look. We saw the hanging blankets and curtains move slightly, and right away we saw... My grandpa quickly stuck his hand in and moved the linen to the side. There was a woman in the dresser. She was a Haitian woman, really small and freakishly skinny. There was a big hole on the right side of the cardboard backing of the dresser. It didn't lead to the outside that we could see. The door was still there, but we instantly knew how she got inside from the position she was in when my grandpa opened the dresser. She was standing up with her knees slightly bent, facing towards the hole. Her hand was up and behind the hole, reaching up towards where the frame of the door would be. We could see her whole body, and I still remember what she was wearing. She had a long flowing sun-colored skirt, a dark green or dark blue shirt that was too small for her, so we could see her depraved belly. She had a rag on her head, but we could see her rough black hair sticking out through the gaps. I don't remember if she had any shoes on at all, but I think she probably did. She also had a thin rope wrapped around her wrist, all the way up to her elbow on her left hand. She was holding a plastic bag that had one or a few small things inside of it. When my grandpa had moved the blankets out of the way, she panicked, and we heard that she had dropped something. It was a couple of nails and screws. That was the sound of it. The ones that were holding the door planks together, I guess. The plank became loose, and she started to push it with her hands really hard. That was the creaking noise we had heard before. After a few seconds of intense struggling, she finally pushed the plank down and started to fit her body through the crack in the door. Her head didn't fit right away, and my grandpa reached towards her and grabbed her arm. She bit him. She bit him so hard that she almost ripped off his friggin' skin. He was bleeding, and she didn't let go until he let her go first. She rammed her head through the door, and we could see how much it actually hurt her to force her head through it, because it made a very distinct scraping sound, and she yelled and screamed at it. Eventually, she tripped over her skirt when she reached the other side of the door, but started to run and run. We had an outdoor sink, and she got on top of it. She climbed the wall that separated our backyard from the backyard of the people on the other side of the same street. The wall was made of cinder blocks, and it was so old and abused that it had a bunch of holes and deformities in it. She used these holes to climb. While she was climbing, my grandpa ran out of our room, past his own bedroom, the living room and dining room, and opened the door to the backyard. We followed him, and as we ran by, my grandmother finally woke up. By the time he got the back door open, and the woman was more than halfway up the wall, he grabbed a machete he kept behind a broken washing machine he had in the yard right next to the door and ran towards her. He swung the machete at her foot, but still missed by a few inches. At that exact moment, the electricity came back on, so all the streetlights flickered and then turned on. We could see her now fully and clearly. She reached the top of the wall and jumped over to the other side. My grandmother, now fully woken up, had followed us to the yard, but didn't see what was happening. She asked, and my grandpa just started swearing and yelling and hollering at this woman who was long gone. This was many years ago, and back in those days, we don't have free emergency services in the Dominican Republic, so there wasn't much that we could do because we simply didn't have any money at all. I mean, no one was hurt in the end. We went to examine the door and the dresser and tried to actually figure out how exactly she got in there almost every night. The woman had removed the screws and nails on one of the planks on the door, cut a hole in the dresser, and was staying inside of it. That woman was inside our room almost every night for about 2 months.
sleeping just a few feet away from us, me and my uncle. We don't know if she ever stepped out of the dresser and walked into the rest of our home. We don't know. We didn't go back to sleep for the rest of that night. Before the sun was fully risen, my grandpa was nailing down the door from both sides. He bought a sack of cement and covered the door with it from the outside. He also replaced another door on the side of the house, which led to the outside as well. It was in the same condition as my bedroom door. We didn't see that woman ever again. I'm glad we did not meet any closer than we had.